Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast, your ticket to all things college football. Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? Join us as we talk college football from the national championship to college rivalries to bowl games to the Heisman Trophy to which conference is the best. We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between.
How's everybody doing? Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. My name is Nick Bowles, and today we're obviously going to be talking about the College Football National Championship game. At the time of this recording, the game just ended. I've got 2 pages of notes here. I'm going to go over it. That's what we're going to talk about for the entire podcast today. And just my initial thoughts. I thought it was a weird game, just sort of when I was watching it and going through it. It was very herky-jerky, very stop and go. I didn't find a whole lot of rhythm in the game, which is also kind of surprising considering there was 67 points. You'd figure things were clicking, things were humming a little bit, and the teams were scoring points, getting up and down the field, which they did. But it just didn't seem like either team really got into a rhythm. LSU, I think a little bit in the second quarter, and in the third quarter at the end of it going into the fourth, LSU started clicking a little bit, but they really struggled in the first quarter. In the beginning of the third, they struggled a little bit as well. Both quarterbacks, I thought, had their woes, had their struggles as they were playing, especially Trevor Lawrence, and really feel bad for him. Sort of that last play there towards the end when he fumbled and kind of sealed Clemson's fate. Definitely felt for him. You could obviously tell that he takes a lot of pride in how he plays, and he sort of, I'm sure, sees the team as his responsibility to get through, and he probably feels that he let him down a little bit. So Joe Burrow at the end ended up having a very good stat line. I mean, he was 31 of 49, so not quite as efficient as he typically is, but ended up with 463 yards, 9.4 yard average, 5 touchdowns. He also broke the single season touchdown record for college football, which was also another little feather in his cap. Trevor Lawrence ended up with 234 total yards on 18 of 37, 6.3 yard average, no touchdowns, no interceptions. Trevor Lawrence obviously struggled. I did not think he would struggle this much. Although, obviously going into this game, I picked LSU to win, to cover the 6 to 7 points. Which, little fun fact, about a couple hours before the game, there was about a 1.5 to 2 point movement towards Clemson. So the Sharks obviously came in there at the end. Obviously they thought they saw something that the public didn't, and they tried to fade the public, and they were wrong. I actually doubled down on my bet when it got down to 5 points for me. I had an okay night. I also had picked the game to go under 70. At halftime, I thought there was absolutely no way the game was going to stay under 70. And by way of just a couple turnovers and some better defense, LSU eating the clock up a little bit at the end, it ended up staying under 70 for a total of 67. 42-25 was your final score. And back to what I was mentioning at the very beginning, the game just felt a little off to me. And I know people are going to say, what does that mean? I mean, there was a total of 67 points scored. Burrows had a good night. LSU ended up winning big. Clemson still scored 25 points. But it just felt as if neither team really got into sort of an offensive groove. I felt that there were some big plays which kind of kept drives going and perhaps ended up putting some points on the board. But there just wasn't a lot of methodical offense, I thought, going on. There wasn't a whole lot of long, sustained drives, which is not necessarily the style of either team. But I guess I was surprised at just how much the two quarterbacks struggled at times, especially Trevor Lawrence. And then all of a sudden you'd have this big play, this sort of lightning in a bottle, flash in a pan, if you will, of a play going 30, 40, 50, 60 yards to get LSU going. You had the wide receivers make a couple big plays, some one-on-one matchups that they took advantage of. But that's just my initial reaction, just sitting down and recording this as soon as the game ended. It just felt like a weird game, and that's just sort of the way I describe it. There were big plays at times, but there were no real sort of long, methodical drives. It didn't really feel like any team was in a quote-unquote groove. And so that's just my initial reaction. My one sort of big thing or big takeaway from the game is it just felt like a very stop-and-go, a very hit-or-miss kind of game. And so I just thought that was a little weird. It was sort of awkward, if you will, if you're really trying to analyze the game or get into the minutia of it. It just was a very herky-jerky game, a very stop-and-go game, and I'm just going to describe it as that. I'd originally thought in my previous podcast, as I said, that LSU was going to come out and they were going to run the ball early and often. They were going to try and test that defensive front. They didn't quite do that, although I thought Clyde Edwards-Helaire was very effective. He ended up with a 6.9 yards per carry average, 16 carries, 110 yards. He broke one for about 25, was his longest. He also had 5 receptions for 54 yards and a 10.8 average. So we saw Clyde Edwards-Helaire get over 160 yards total. His role was very weird, I thought, as well. I thought early on they were going to run the ball heavy. I thought that perhaps they saw the success that Robbins had against them when Ohio State played Clemson, and I thought they would try to duplicate that, especially since if you can just turn around and hand the ball off to your running back and you're getting some good results from it, that's always preferable if you can do that in football. But they came out and they let Burrows do his thing, and they were throwing the rock around. LSU looked like they were in a little bit of trouble early and often. They started the first 2 drives, I believe, on their 3 and 7 yard line, something like that. Essentially on their 5 yard line is where they started their first 2 drives. And it did not look good. Clemson was getting some good pressure up the middle. Burrows did not look comfortable. He wasn't getting a whole lot of time. And it really looked like the Clemson defense was going to control the game. And one thing I didn't like early on was that LSU was coming out and running these 4 and 5 wide receiver sets, no running back in the backfield. And I thought, if that's what you're going to do, then at least put in another wide receiver besides Clyde Edwards-Helaire. At least put in another perhaps speedy playmaker who can, go up and make a play or catch a ball. And another thing I didn't like about that is, when you take the running back out of the backfield, you run an empty set, you're not making the defense have to think about it. You're not at least having to make the defense respect you. And obviously coaches know more than I do. Obviously Ed Orgeron knows more than I do, but I've always just not really preferred the empty set, depending on the situation, especially in a game like this. And you're allowing a great defense like Clemson to essentially just tee up on you, and you're sort of showing your hand that you're just going to pass. And so I thought for the first couple drives, I thought they really struggled because of that. And so after the first 2 drives, LSU got some things going. The game started to change a little bit. So when we come back, I want to break down the first quarter a little more, and we'll get into the second quarter where I think LSU essentially turned the tides and took over the game and didn't look back. So stay tuned, and I'll be right back.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back. Obviously, we're talking about the national championship game. LSU wins it 42-25. And in the last segment, I was talking sort of about the beginning of the game, how I thought LSU was struggling. They were putting Clyde Edwards-Helaire out, splitting him out as a wide receiver. I didn't think that was a very good look. Running the empty set, I thought allowed Clemson to sort of tee up and play a one-dimensional game. And if you're going to kind of show your hand to a great defense like Clemson, I don't think it's going to bode very well for you. So, first two drives, LSU's backed up about their own 5-yard line each drive. Both teams sort of trade possessions. LSU punts it on their second possession. They get a great bounce on the punt. And I was sort of feeling as if one team was due for a big play, whether that be defensively or offensively. I could kind of just feel that something's got to give here. In fact, I even wrote down on my notes right before that possession, who was going to make a play, ? And I could just feel it coming. I knew something had to give. And lo and behold, Trevor Lawrence hooks up with his tight end, who I guess had been suspended or sitting out the whole year. That was also the play that they had the blind side or the illegal block on the Clemson wide receiver against the LSU defensive back. Ended up not making that much of a difference as Trevor Lawrence would go in to run in for the touchdown. Then they trade a couple more possessions, a couple more punts. And this is where I thought LSU offensively would begin to find their confidence. And I also felt a little vindicated because this touchdown was set up with Clyde Edwards-Helaire in the play action, which I thought they were going to do a little earlier. But on this drive, Joe Burrow completes a pass for 7 yards. Clyde Edwards-Helaire picks up a first down for 3 yards. He hands it off again to Helaire for 8 yards. And then the next play does the play action. Defense bites. He's able to throw it over the top. He hooks up with Jamar Chase for 52 yards. Again, not necessarily the greatest offense, but a big play, and they're able to capitalize on it. Clemson comes back. They kick the field goal, and we're sitting at 10-7. And it was a nice kick, by the way, a 52-yarder line drive, which I was a little surprised because in one of the earlier possessions, Clemson looks like they had thought about kicking the field goal, but instead they decided to punt it, which ended up also being a good decision because they pinned LSU pretty deep in their own territory. But a good kick by the kicker makes it 10-7. LSU punts again, and they're actually able to pin Clemson on their own 4-yard line. And I thought perhaps that this would end up being a lower scoring game. I mean, both of the kicking teams, the special teams, had done a great job up until then. And on this possession, Clemson would end up scoring, remember, putting a drive together from their own 4-yard line, and they do it in 4 plays. Lawrence has a good pass for 24 yards. Then Travis Etienne has a run for 29 yards. Travis Etienne again for 7 yards. And then quite possibly what was the play of the game was T. Higgins on the reverse for 36 yards on the score. And he ran over a defender to get to the pylon. Ended up being a very nice play. And if you've seen the last few national title games, I think you begin to get this feeling that Clemson's been here before. They've got the right play calls. Dabo Swinney's going to make the right moves to put his players in the best positions to score, and they're going to execute. And it seems as if Clemson's going to run away with this thing. And on that reverse, I mean, LSU bit on the fake about as hard as you could. And again, it's not necessarily their fault when you're trying to contain Travis Etienne, but it really felt that Dabo Swinney was making the right calls and he was getting that LSU defense off balance, and that Clemson was just going to do what they were going to always do, and that's win the national title game. And so they go up 17-7, they're up by 10, and if you're an LSU fan, you know you have to respond. You have got to score. You've got to show that you can keep up with Clemson and that there's a reason why you're here as well. And again, not necessarily a long, sustaining drive from LSU, but they essentially have two big plays, both to Jamar Chase for a total of about 74 yards between two passes, one of them going for 56 yards to the Clemson 3. And so essentially you have big plays are keeping LSU in this ball game. Two, maybe three big passes and a run from Joe Burrows. And essentially that's all that LSU has managed to muster up against Clemson. But on that second touchdown, that second big play that essentially allowed them to get the score to within 3 at 17-14, I felt that was really the turning point in the game. Perhaps if you do it once, it's a fluke. Maybe you're not too confident if you can do it again. Maybe a defender missed or you happen to catch them out of position and you're able to take advantage of that one particular moment. But when they come back and they do it again, they make another big play, I think LSU began to get the feeling that they can do this again and again and again. That, or they know they have a matchup they like, they had a game plan going in that this is what they were going to do, and they're able to do it. And so while I thought at this time Joe Burrows was struggling, I thought Trevor Lawrence was, not having to deal with as much pressure, I think those two plays really told LSU, if this is how we played up until now, not necessarily playing our best, but we're down 17-14 now, two big plays, I think we can do it again. And I think everyone started to feed off of that, and I really thought that was the turning point in the game, was the second touchdown. Essentially the second big play where Burrows hooks up with the wide receiver deep downfield and Jamar Chase. And so we have the next play, or the next possession rather, for Clemson. They come down and they punt, and then LSU gets the ball back. And I was thinking to myself that if LSU can put together a good drive here, not necessarily just another big play, but a drive, maybe 4, 5, 6, 7 or more plays, and they're able to sort of send a message that they are now beginning to figure Clemson out, I thought that they could not only take the lead, but more importantly, take the momentum and send a message. Now, again, obviously taking the lead is important, but sometimes, a team might be up or something happens, a bounce of the ball, and people know that throughout the game the better team will win, and that although you might be up now, people don't really have confidence that you're actually going to be able to keep that lead. But LSU comes back and they score a touchdown, a nice drive. Joe Burrow makes a couple nice passes. This is the drive where Clyde Edwards-Helaire got away with one on the sideline a little bit where his hand and his foot barely touched the white, and the refs didn't call it, but, to the victor goes the spoils, and he gets away with one. A nice 6-7 play drive. Joe Burrows throws the ball around, spreads it out to his receivers, and they go up 21-17. And although the game would stay close for a little longer, I really thought in the back of my mind that was the game. I thought now that this had happened, LSU knew that they could play with these guys. LSU knew they could move the ball on them. Joe Burrows was beginning to feel himself a little bit. He was looking a lot more comfortable in the pocket. And on the flip side, the LSU defense was now getting to Trevor Lawrence a little bit. And I'll go into a little more detail about why I thought Trevor Lawrence struggled a little bit. But I really thought on this drive, LSU sent a message. And they sent a message that you are not going to be able to stop us. We're going to do what we want, and your only hope to win this game is to keep up. And I really felt the LSU defense, as the game went on, got better and better and better. They were getting to Trevor Lawrence a little more. And so I really thought this was the turning point in the game. I really thought this is where the mental part of the game switched from Clemson's favor to LSU's. I mean, we're talking about in a matter of minutes going from being down 17-7 on a great reverse from Higgins to being up 21-17 and telling Clemson that you came to play. And that instead of Clemson possibly having your number, that now it seemed like you had their number and that you were coming for them and that it was going to be a long night if they weren't able to figure you out. So in the next segment, we'll start going into the end of the second quarter, halftime, and then why I thought Trevor Lawrence struggled as much as he did. So stay tuned. I'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Hello, welcome back. We're going to continue to recap and go over the national championship game. When we had left off last segment, I thought LSU had essentially taken over the game. It was essentially the turning point in the game, going from being down 17-7, and then LSU puts together two drives. The first of those being a big play to Jamar Chase, the second one of the game to make it 17-14. And then LSU comes back with a more impressive drive in terms of number of plays, being more methodical, Burrow spreading the ball around, Clyde Edwards-Helaire gets involved a little bit. And I thought they really, sent a mental message to Clemson that this was LSU's game to win and that Clemson was going to have to figure out how to stop them, or that Clemson was going to be in for a battle all night at the very least. Next possession, Clemson ends up punting it, and I really thought while the last drive by LSU was where they sent a message where they took control of the momentum, on this next drive I really thought there was a backbreaker of a play for Clemson where they had LSU at 3rd and 19 and they commit a defensive pass interference call on a ball that was not very well thrown. It was behind the wide receiver. He didn't even lead his receiver very well. And again, both quarterbacks were, in my opinion, were struggling at this point. I know Burrows ended up with a pretty good stat line, but essentially Burrows has had a couple nice plays that he was able to capitalize on for touchdowns. Trevor Lawrence had started out okay, and then he really began to struggle in the second quarter. I thought the LSU defense was finally getting to him a little bit, and Burrow's pocket was starting to look a little cleaner, and he was starting to have some more time. So up until that point, though, I thought they had both struggled a little bit, and perhaps you can give some credit to the defense. I thought the Clemson defensive backs did a great job early on, and it seems like they were all over the LSU wide receivers, and they had no room to breathe. Not even defensive pass interference or anything like that. I just think that the Clemson defensive backs and cornerbacks were all over those wide receivers, and I think you could really see some frustration in LSU when that was going on early in the game. But in the second quarter, things began to change. I really thought the LSU front, the linebackers, began to get some pressure on Trevor Lawrence, started to make him think a little more, pressure him a little bit. And as I was saying, in terms of this drive, Clemson had LSU on a 3rd and 19, and they commit just an awful defensive pass interference call, very unforgivable in this situation. If the defensive back got burned and perhaps he thought he was going to give up a touchdown, I could possibly see why you would do that. But this was not a well-thrown ball, and there was no reason to make a mistake like this. So LSU gets a fresh set of downs. Clemson again has LSU at 3rd and 5 on their own 44. Burrows is able to complete a pass to Jefferson for 9 yards for a first down. Clemson then has them at 3rd and 10 on their own 35, and Joe Burrows is able to run for 29 yards to the Clemson 6 for a first down. And on 1st and goal, he throws to Mr. Moss, the tight end, Randy Moss's son, Thaddeus Moss, for a touchdown. I believe he had 2 on the night. And I really thought at this time, I thought the writing was on the wall. I know we still have a whole half of football to go, but just seeing the way that things were changing, it seemed as if Clemson maybe had sort of a scripted beginning, right? And that scripted beginning went very well in terms of what they had, the reverse, things like this. And I felt like LSU figured them out a little bit, and that Clemson was really starting to struggle there at the end of the second quarter. Also, I thought early on LSU did not tackle very well against Etienne. They let him have a few plays, pick up a couple first downs that I thought they had him wrapped up in the backfield or had him dead to rights in a few times, and they let him kind of squirm away, which is no fault to the LSU Tigers. We're talking about arguably the most explosive or one of the most explosive offensive players in college football. And to be honest, even watching Etienne in the game tonight, it's quite obvious that he is very fast, very athletic, and probably one of the scariest matchups in all of college football, as Ed Orgeron pointed out. And so why I thought the writing was on the wall in terms of the middle to end of the second quarter was for LSU's ability to get to Trevor Lawrence and the fact that he just didn't look comfortable. Even when he maybe got out of the pocket and he had some room, there wasn't really a defender around him. He just didn't seem to be quite on as he usually is. And so one of the reasons I began to notice or see in terms of why he was struggling, and I noticed throughout the night he threw a lot of balls that went over his receivers or sailed a little high. I remember when I used to play baseball, T-ball, nothing big or serious, I'm not trying to brag, but I was a pitcher, or I liked to pitch, and one of the things I learned was the bigger the step you take, typically the lower a ball will be, and if you tend to take a shorter step, it tends to perhaps maybe sail on you or go a little high. And so as the game went on past halftime and into the third and fourth quarter, you know, LSU was putting a lot of pressure on Trevor Lawrence. They were actually able to get to him, but also he was not getting a very good pocket. And I just felt a lot of times when he was trying to put some zip on the ball downfield, he didn't really have a lot of room to step into his throw or to step forward up into the pocket and make that nice throw with the good form. And I felt like he wasn't able to perhaps take as big of a step as he wanted to when he threw. And I felt a lot of his passes were going high. They were sailing over his wide receivers. And as I was watching the game, I was just noticing he wasn't really able to step into his throws very well. And so sometimes a lot of people don't pick up on those smaller things of, you know, why is a guy not throwing well? Why is a guy not running well? Why is he not finding holes? Why is the quarterback not able to possibly put the ball in the money like he has all year? And so I was noticing that not necessarily that LSU was sacking Trevor Lawrence a whole lot, but that he did not have a clean, comfortable pocket like he had in the first quarter. And if you notice in the first quarter, man, he was making some good throws. Not necessarily that they were hard throws, but he was putting it where it should be. And in the second quarter, and then for the rest of the game, I really noticed he did not have a clean space to step into to put that ball down the field on the money where his receivers could make a play. And more importantly, or to be even more exact, they were going high. And so I was just noticing he was taking short steps. He didn't really have a lot of room in front of him to take perhaps a bigger step when you really need to drive the ball 30, 40 yards downfield and you're trying to put it on the numbers in a tight window. And so I thought that was where I thought LSU really began to change the game in terms of their defense. Again, you don't necessarily have to sack a guy or to crush a quarterback to send a message or to alter his game plan or to alter how he feels in the pocket. sometimes it really is just that quote-unquote pressure, that feeling of bodies being around you and not having the pocket that you're used to, or a clean pocket where you feel you can take a step left or right or up or back and sort of move as you need to in order to put the ball where you want it. So at this point, LSU's taken a commanding lead, 28-17, going into halftime. And when we come back for the next segment, we'll go into the second half and we'll break that down as well, and how I think LSU really sealed the deal, really put Clemson away in a very, very impressive fashion. So we'll break that down when we come back. Stay tuned.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red-hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's gsmcpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Hello, welcome back. Last segment, we just wrapped up the first half. LSU is up 28-17. I really thought that offensively they had begun to figure things out and hit their stride. I also thought that defensively LSU had figured out this Clemson offense, and I just got the feeling that they were going to continue to do this in the second half. Now, for me personally, as I said in the previous segment or two, I thought the writing was on the wall. I just really got the feeling that this was LSU's night. They were going to get it done. I thought that Burrows was beginning to get the better of that Clemson defense. And going into the game, I thought that if Clemson was going to win, it'd be their defense that won it for them. And if LSU was going to win, they would have to offensively be able to beat that Clemson defense. I sort of thought that the LSU defense versus the Clemson offense would perhaps be a tie or sort of a wash in the grand scheme of things. And I think overall I was right about that. I think the LSU defense probably played a little better than I thought they would. I thought Clemson would still be able to manufacture some more points, but we come out at halftime. LSU has the ball. I thought if they really wanted to send a message, they score here, or that would perhaps really bolster their confidence and maybe not necessarily put it away, but essentially they'd have one hand on the trophy or one foot already out the door going to the championship party. So they come out at halftime. They have to punt, so that didn't happen. And I got to be honest, Clemson comes back and they score very fast. However, there had been a penalty on the punt that allowed Clemson to get it to the 50-yard line. And then during that drive, there was also another penalty, a face mask penalty, that kind of really moved the ball for Clemson. I mean, we're talking about 30 yards, which is essentially, they got more yards on penalties than what they did actually as an offense moving the ball. And even though Clemson scored fast and they went for two and got it to make it 28-25, make it a 3-point game, I got to be real honest, I wasn't very worried. I wasn't really concerned that Clemson was going to do this again. It felt like fool's gold is probably the best way to put it. It just, when it happened and it was 25-28, I'm sure a lot of people thought, oh, here we go, now we got a game, Clemson's right back in it. But for me, I was sitting there watching it, and it just felt like fool's gold. I just wasn't convinced that Clemson was going to be able to duplicate that and do it consistently in the second half. And although LSU had come out and they had punted for their first possession, I had complete confidence that LSU was still going to be able to move the ball and put some points on the board or make some big plays that they were going to be able to capitalize on like they did in the first half. So lo and behold, the score is now 28-25. Clemson has cut the lead to 3. LSU comes back and they punt. They give the ball back to Clemson. They punt. And again, at this point, what I'm seeing is that, if LSU isn't moving the ball, it's kind of more or less they're kind of shooting themselves in the foot instead of something that Clemson is doing to prevent them from moving the football. And on the other side, I thought that Clemson, even when given some opportunities, Trevor Lawrence still was just not finding his rhythm. And so I thought the difference was that Trevor Lawrence never really got comfortable. Trevor Lawrence never really found that groove. And on the other side, I thought Burrows was beginning to find his groove, even though these first 2 possessions out of halftime were punts. I thought it was more, perhaps a miscommunication, something that LSU was doing offensively to themselves that they could easily correct. And on the Clemson side, I felt that perhaps it was things that LSU were doing on defense that was giving them some troubles and some hard times. And, I thought they tackled much, much better in the second half. I don't really remember a whole lot of tackles being broken from ETN like they were in the first half. And I really thought that defense started to smell some blood in the water. And they knew that if they could hold Clemson, I think they knew that this game was theirs. And I really think that defense started to queue up on Clemson. And like I just said, I think they smelled blood, and I think they went for it. And overall, their tackling was superb in the second half, whereas in the first half, I thought ETN and a few other of the wide receivers maybe squirmed away out of some arm tackles and things like this. So the next possession, LSU gets a punt. They have it on their own 32-yard line. Burrows runs for 10 yards to the 42. Then we have an incomplete pass, a delay of game. So now they're back at their own 37. Burrows runs for 4 yards to the LSU 41. And we're at 3rd and 11 at the LSU 41. And I thought this was the play of the second half that crystallized in my mind what I thought was eventually going to be an LSU victory. And it's 3rd and 11. And Burrows completes a bubble screen to Jamar Chase for 43 yards down to the Clemson 16. And I really thought that when this play happened, I thought that this essentially sealed the fate of the game. Now, this is just me. Maybe I'm looking too much into it, but it was just one of those things. 3rd and 11. It was very similar to the 3rd and 19 that Clemson had LSU at in the first half, where Clemson committed a very stupid penalty and gave LSU some life. Here we have LSU 3rd and 11 at their own 41. Looks like they're probably not going to get it. And instead of making some big pass downfield or something of this nature, and I mean it's just a little shovel pass to Jamar Chase, who then takes it for 43 yards down to the Clemson 16. And if that wasn't bad enough, on the very next play, you had the linebacker for Clemson, James Skalski, commit a targeting penalty, and essentially he's removed from the game. And maybe this is just college football and the cosmos, but, I think about the targeting penalty against Ohio State, how perhaps you could have called helmet to helmet, but I didn't think that he was trying to be malicious, or I didn't think he deserved the targeting penalty and to be thrown out of the game. I thought Skalski did lower his head. Again, I'm not one that really likes the call of ejecting players based on that, but he's removed from the game. He's ejected for targeting. And the very next play, Joe Burrows finds Thaddeus Moss for his second touchdown of the game. For me, this was the game. This was it. This was essentially the foot being put on the throat of Clemson. And I just thought there was no coming back from this. At this time, it's 35-25. I know that's only 10 points, and I know that Clemson's a very talented team. But again, it's just the feeling of the game when I'm watching it. This just felt like the backbreaker of the second half, much like the backbreaker of the first half. Just one of those things where LSU had them, and for them to give up that 3rd and 11 and then to lose their linebacker, and then for LSU to score immediately after, 3 plays, boom, boom, boom. Man, that just really takes the wind out of your sails. I know that Clemson in their mind still thought that they were going to win that game or had a chance, but for those of us watching at home, and at least for me anyways, I was not seeing enough from the Clemson side of the football to warrant me thinking they could win that game. So that's just where I was at that point in time. When we come back, we'll break down the rest of the game. Essentially, LSU scores one more touchdown, and the celebration is on. So when we come back, we'll break that down. So stay tuned. I'll be right back.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Back. We are continuing my recap and my thoughts of the national championship game. At this point in time, in my mind, LSU had won the game. They just had 3 back-to-back plays. Burrows throws a little bubble screen to Jamar Chase. He takes it for 43 yards to the Clemson 16. The next play, Skalski, the linebacker, commits a targeting penalty. He's removed from the game. And then the very next play, Thaddeus Moss catches a touchdown to put LSU up by 10, 35-25. So Clemson gets the ball back, and I thought that if they had any chance to come back, I thought that they had to score and they had to respond in kind in terms of the way the momentum was beginning to build and snowball on top of them, both offensively and defensively. I thought LSU was getting better on both ends of the ball as the game went on. I thought Clemson came out and punched LSU in the mouth in the first quarter, the early second quarter, and the way LSU responded from essentially after the reverse by Higgins, I thought that the way LSU had responded after that LSU had taken over the game and that LSU was winning the game. And it's kind of like a boxing match, I guess you could say. It's almost like the first guy coming out in the first round or two, getting knocked down, he takes a big hit or two, and so it looks like he's just going to get pummeled into the mat. And then for the rest of the 10 rounds, for the remainder of the 10 rounds out of the 12, he just jabs away, he punches, he uppercuts, he's hitting in the torso, he's hitting in the stomach, he's throwing his hook, his jab, and I mean, he's just really working his opponent to the point that he ends up winning the boxing match. And maybe that's not the best analogy, but that's just sort of how I saw as the game went on. LSU just seemed to hone in more and more on Clemson, what they were doing, both offensively and defensively. And as the game went on, LSU seemed to continue to pick up momentum, and I just didn't see anything from Clemson that was worrying me. I guess I thought if ETN was not going to make some big plays, if they were not going to be able to have Trevor Lawrence hook up with some receivers as he seemed to be struggling, I just wasn't very confident that Clemson was going to be able to put anything together to mount a comeback against LSU. So at this point, essentially, I thought LSU had sort of delivered, maybe not quite a knockout blow, but I thought they delivered a very big blow to Clemson when they were able to complete those 3 plays in a row. The pass to Jamar Chase, Clemson, their linebacker Skalski getting ejected for targeting, and then essentially they were able to capitalize with the touchdown. So the next possession for Clemson, they end up punting, and again, LSU, I thought, was really keying up on Trevor Lawrence. I didn't see anything from him that inspired me to think that he was going to be able to mount a comeback. And so they have to punt. And then this is actually what I thought was one of the more interesting plays of the game in terms of how I would have done it compared to what Ed Orgeron did. And, of course, again, Ed Orgeron knows more football than I could ever hope to know, and he's obviously the head coach of a national champion. So I'm not trying to say he's wrong or anything, but this is where LSU missed a field goal. And I really thought that on 4th and 4 at the Clemson 27, I would rather put the ball in the hands of Joe Burrows and try to pick up those 4 yards and run some more time off the clock. And if you can get another touchdown to go up 42-25, essentially with the third quarter coming to a close in the next couple minutes, I just really didn't like that call. I really thought that I would have put the ball in Joe Burrow's hands. You're on the Clemson 27. And whether you pick up that first down or not, I thought the better play would have been to try and pick up the first and run some more time off the clock. So they missed the field goal. I was just very sour at that play call. I don't know why, but I didn't like that play call at all. I would have rather ran the ball or let Burrows try and pick up the first and sort of really send the message. And again, just like with Clemson and how the first couple of possessions they might have had the opportunity to try a long field goal, but they ended up punting it, and then later on they made their field goal from 52 yards out, which was a great kick. I just felt that, I don't understand why you would take the chance with a 45-yarder, and I believe that the kicker from about 45 to 49, something of that nature, 40 to 49 yards, he's a little bit better than 50%. So, unless my kicker was some sort of, eagle-eye sharpshooter and I was totally confident he was going to make that kick, I would have rather put the ball in the hands of my Heisman and let him try to make a play instead of giving it to my kicker who is, above average, let's say. That's just me. I really didn't like that call. It still is bugging me to this moment, in case you can't tell. But anyways, they go ahead and they miss the field goal. Clemson then comes back and they go 3 and out. And to me, this was the lights being turned off. I thought that whatever diminishing hope that Clemson might have had to win the game, I thought to go 3 and out at this point in time in the game, to me, was essentially ending the game without ending it. I won't even call it a nail in the coffin, but I thought that Clemson needed to at least get a field goal here to pull within a touchdown. And not only did they not get a field goal, but they go 3 and out. I mean, they didn't even get to the other side of the field. So they go ahead and they punt, and Justin Jefferson catches the punt at the LSU 43. And so I think if you're sitting there as a fan or just someone watching football, you've got to at least think that LSU gets a field goal here to go up by 13. And so when they went 3 and out and they had to punt from their own 25 and then LSU gets the ball on their own 43, really you're just looking for LSU to pick up 1 or 2 first downs and essentially being able to put the game away with the field goal. Now I know I just talked about how the kicker missed the field goal, but the way their offense had been moving, you got to think that they probably can get a few yards, a few first downs, run some time off the clock. It was very obvious at this time that they probably would at least go into the fourth quarter. So LSU is looking very nice. They have a nice setup here in which it looks like they're going to be able to put this game away as long as they take care of the ball. No faux pas, no mishaps. So I thought literally when the punt left the kicker's foot and Justin Jefferson caught the ball at the 43, at the LSU 43, in my mind, it was LSU's game to put away. They only needed a field goal, in my opinion, to essentially do everything but win the game and hoist the trophy. Essentially, they would be closing the door behind them if they could get a field goal and go up by 13. So we'll come back. We'll break down the fourth quarter, the ending. What does this mean? Where do LSU and Clemson go from here? And so when we come back, we're going to break down the remainder of the game, the ending of the game, and break down how all that played out. So come back and we'll talk about that.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Thanks for coming back. This will be the final segment. We're breaking down the last quarter of the national championship game. We just left off. Clemson went 3-0 in what I thought was sort of their last hope, or what could possibly be their last gasp to sort of give themselves a chance to come back in this game. At this point, when they punted, they're down by 10. When they punted, Justin Jefferson gets the ball at the 43 for a fair catch. And in my mind, as I kind of ended the last segment, I thought LSU just needed to pick up a couple first downs, maybe 20, 30 yards, and essentially they'll be kicking a field goal to go up by 13. On this next drive, we're looking at the third quarter winding down, and LSU at this point in time has begun to lean on Clyde Edwards-Helaire a little bit, which I thought was a good move. I kind of had a fear or a worry that LSU would continue to try and air it out and sort of just leave themselves open to a possible mistake, some kind of tip ball, something of this nature. Keeping the clock going and relying on the running back was a good move. And again, I thought that they were going to run early and often. Kind of seemed to be the opposite. They seemed to really lean on Clyde Edwards-Helaire towards the end of the game, and I thought he did a great job protecting the ball, getting down instead of going out of bounds, things of this nature. So we're looking at this possession for LSU, which ended up being the nail in the coffin. They received the ball at their own 43. It's 25-35. They give a handoff to Clyde Edwards-Helaire, 5 yards. Pass complete to Clyde Edwards-Helaire, 15 yards. LSU gets a personal foul on their offensive lineman, which I thought was a little weak, but it is what it is. They made the call. So on that note, the third quarter ends. Essentially, LSU is 1st and 10 at their own 48 now. Joe Burrows completes to Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Joe Burrows then goes to Thaddeus Moss. He then goes to Justin Jefferson. And then Clyde Edwards-Helaire gets a handoff. He then completes a pass to Justin Jefferson for 1 yard. And then what I thought was perhaps the best catch of the night, Joe Burrows completes a nice sort of one-on-one jump ball to Terrence Marshall for about 24 yards. And it really was just a great catch, a sort of cherry on top kind of play. Joe Burrows allowing his 6'4" wide receiver to go up and make a play, and essentially ended up being the play that was the nail in the coffin. And just overall, I mean, was just kind of a good way to end it, I think, if you're LSU. Sort of that final touchdown. Really, as I said just a second ago, the nail in the coffin. I think at this point you're looking at a victory almost no matter what. I don't see any scenario where Clemson pulls this off. So Clemson gets the ball with about 12 minutes to go. And the reason why I thought that the game essentially was out of reach at this point, even though you could argue that there's plenty of time for something to happen, this is where, although I may have been wrong in my predictions of LSU running the ball early and often, you're almost certainly going to be running the ball once they get it back. And I thought that even if they handed the ball off to Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Clemson knows it's coming once they get the ball back, no matter what Clemson does here, that LSU essentially would be able to end the game the next possession is what I was thinking. That even if Clemson was going to tee up and try to, commit to the run and stop LSU, try to call a timeout or two and see if they can get another possession, onside kick, what have you. I really thought that if LSU wanted to just simply hand the ball off to Clyde Edwards-Helaire, they'd be able to run plenty of time off the clock. That being said, I did say that if Clemson could score fast here or make a quick score, that there could be some possibility for them to make a couple more plays and possibly, pull out some kind of upset in this situation against LSU. And they almost did it. They threw a Hail Mary pass to Higgins, and he was called off for offensive pass interference. That would have been a touchdown otherwise. Overall, I agree with the call. It looked like Higgins was kind of grabbing on his shoulder pad area of his jersey. And as the ball was coming, it looks like Higgins stopped to make a play on the ball. And as he stopped, he continued to pull on the defender's jersey. Now, I know a lot of times it's very bang-bang and it could go either way. But I thought overall in that situation, I thought it was the right call. So unfortunately for Clemson, the one break they were looking for, they didn't get. They also set them back 15 more yards. Clemson ends up punting from their own 36, and it was 4th and 26, so there's no chance that you're going to go for it. So unfortunately, they have to punt. They only took 2 minutes off the clock, but to me, that was essentially any sort of glimmering hope that Clemson had on their sideline or on their coaching staff or as a team or players. Any glimmering hope that they might have had of possibly pulling off some kind of miracle, I think essentially died with that offensive pass interference call. And obviously I thought the game was over before this. I think even if they scored there and the game becomes 32-42, I just don't see them still being able to pull off some kind of upset miracle. So they go ahead and punt. LSU now is getting the ball with about 10 minutes to go. And like I said just a second ago, it becomes the Clyde Edwards-Helaire show. And first play, Edwards-Helaire, 8 yards. Second play, Edwards-Helaire, 2 yards. We got a first down at the LSU 20. Third play, Edwards-Helaire, 16 yards. Next play, Edwards-Helaire, 5 yards. And eventually we're down to 4 minutes and 45 seconds. And sort of what those plays didn't illustrate, though, was some great awareness by Clyde Edwards-Helaire. There were a few plays where he sort of got the yards he needed. He was running in the open field, and he essentially just goes down, stays in bounds, keeps the clock going. And if there's one thing I cannot stand in sports sometimes, it is lack of attention to detail. It's the lack of awareness of your situation. What is at stake? What's the best play to make? Should I try to pick up the extra yard, or should I possibly just go down in bounds and keep the clock running? So I want to give Edwards-Helaire some credit, instead of maybe trying to pad his stats some more or what have you. He essentially just decided to go down, run the clock, and I always find little things like that. If you played sports before, or if you've just watched a lot of sports, these sort of heads-up plays that perhaps don't ooh and awe the crowd, they don't move people to jump out of their seats, but it's little plays like that as a coach, and if you're a real fan, you understand the importance of having smart players like that and being aware of their surroundings. They go ahead and punt it, and they punted it to the Clemson 15, which was a great punt. And this was the unfortunate play. Trevor Lawrence is just trying to make a play for his team. Tries to run it, and great tackle, putting his shoulder pads right on the ball. There's a fumble caused by Grant Delpit. Of course, Derek Stingley Jr. recovers it, and essentially that's all she wrote. Again, just an amazing game. I thought it was a fun game to watch, although I said early on it was quote-unquote herky-jerky. I thought it was a very exciting game to watch. In my opinion, a lot of ups and downs, which I think makes for a good game. I thought this game had a lot of explosive plays, a lot of sort of lulls, and then all of a sudden, bang, bang, a couple big plays, and it's very exciting to watch. So I had mentioned this in my previous podcast as well, and that I thought that with this LSU team, there was just a sense of destiny. And I know sometimes that might sound like pie in the sky, or how do you qualify and quantify, quote unquote, a team of destiny, but just Ed Orgeron and Joe Burrows, taking a gamble on himself, coming over from Ohio State, and all these guys just having a sort of chip on their shoulder, this sort of pride and this thought that, we're not even supposed to be here to begin with. we were all sort of written off, Orgeron sort of coming up through the system. I just felt like it was their time, and, perhaps Clemson just being so good for so long, maybe they were just due for a loss, but I just really enjoyed watching LSU this year, and Clemson, by the way, another great team, and Trevor Lawrence deserves all the credit he gets, but the numbers that Burrow put up this year and just the competition that they went through to get there, I just had a sense that these guys were going to be very disappointed if they didn't win it, and they were going to do whatever it took to win. So I thought overall they were the better team. I thought they had the better playmakers. Obviously, Clemson had the better coach up to this point, and I think Dabo Swinney will continue to do great things at Clemson, including, in my opinion, he will be in the championship game next year again. And unfortunately for LSU, you lose a player like Joe Burrows. It's very hard to sit here and say if they'll make the championship game again, but I hope Ed Orgeron continues to do good things at LSU, and I think he will. So that was my review of the championship game. I thought it was a great game, fun game to watch. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. Thank you for listening to the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. As always, please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review if you don't mind. That always helps our numbers, helps us get our name out there. Be sure to give us a like and a follow on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I really appreciate you guys stopping in and listening to me again, and have a great night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From football to basketball, baseball to MMA, and even soccer. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast.